Get going. Good morning, everybody. Welcome very much to The Box, which is Mills and Reeves' webinar series for insurance brokers, insurance intermediaries, and their insurers. My name is James Thompson. I'm a partner in our insurance group, and I spend a lot of my time working with brokers and with insurance intermediaries. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Keating, who is the Chief Executive of the Managing General Agents Association, the MGAA. Morning, Mike.
Good morning, James. Delighted to be here.
And great to have you on, and thanks very much for joining us. As I say, we returned from our summer break today. Over our last few webinars, we focused quite a lot on insurance brokers, so I think it's about time we gave the intermediaries some airtime. So we're delighted to have you on today. Mike, would you like to kick off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and your professional background?
Okay, well, as you can tell by the colour of my hair, I've been in the industry for nearly 40 years. I won't go all the way back to when I joined the industry at the ripe age of 16, but fundamentally I've had the fortune of being on the carrier side. So up to 2011, 2012, I was on the board of AXA Insurance, and in particular, I was responsible for the deployment of capital to MGAs when I was at AXA. And then since then, up until 4 years ago, when I took over as CEO of the MGAA, I was actually running MGAs, both large and small, both in commercial and in sort of personal lines. So I suppose for the audience, I've got, for a bit of luck and judgment, I've got sort of experience being on a carrier side in terms of dealing with MGAs, and actually being on the other side of the table, being a recipient of capital in terms of running MGAs myself.
Fantastic. And I'm sure that makes you really well placed to run the MGAA and to be that sort of trusted partners to businesses in the sector. And on that, could you tell us a little bit about the role and the purpose of the MGAA?
So the MGAA has been established for sort of 14 years. So we are basically the only not-for-profit trade association representing the MGA community. And that MGA community, in terms of our membership, sort of encompasses 3 tiers. So we have our MGA members, clearly, and we have close to 240 of those currently. We have insurers who support the MGA model by deployment of capital, and we have over 60 of those presently. And then we have suppliers, and suppliers are sort of very valued members who provide products and services to either our insurer members or our MGA members. So that's effectively, the membership structure. But our role really is to be at the centre and represent the interests of the MGA community, and that would be through the application or introduction of networking and events. We invest heavily in terms of a program of learning and insight, so we're very, very sort of passionate around improving both the professionalism and education of the MGA community. And naturally, as a trade association, we are there to represent the full interests of our members with their colleagues in the regulatory bodies and other sort of trade associations as well.
Fantastic. And as I said at the start, here on The Box, we're very often talking to insurance brokers as well as insurance intermediaries. And on that, you've recently had an exciting announcement regarding your affiliation with the British Insurance Brokers Association. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, absolutely delighted sort of to work with Graham and the BIBA team. So the first thing really to share is the fact that 90% of the MGA members actually deal with the broker community. So that, so we have a very, very weighted interest in terms of working with BIBA and what BIBA are doing. We will always remain separate trade associations because MGAs are different to brokers and considerably different. But what this sort of alliance and sort of partnership allows us to do together is, first and foremost, we can sort of support each other on our respective events, which is great because MGAs want to talk to brokers, and brokers are always looking for markets in terms of for their customers, and MGAs are becoming an increasing part of brokers placing fabric. Also, just as importantly, when you look at sort of the regulation landscape, there are a number of areas where us and BIBA joining together in terms of lobbying or sort of creating sort of papers back to the regulatory bodies on behalf of both of our memberships combined, does give a powerful voice. And you can only look at things around fair value, you can look at things around consumer duty, which we may touch on. And what Matt Brewers has been particularly keen to share is that he likes, and the regulator likes, where trade bodies are collaborating together to present back to them sort of a unified voice, where we are identifying challenges in some of that regulatory sort of landscape, but also opportunities as well. So that's just a couple of areas which we're very, very excited to working with BIBA. And just importantly, again, repeating myself, of course, we're all passionate around bringing young talent into our industry. It's a fantastic industry to work in. I've been in it, as I mentioned earlier, 40 years. And so again, our respective next generation groups will be able to collaborate and combine and again produce even greater elevation to actually attract young talent into our industry, because it's become an increasingly competitive market to attract sort of talent into insurance, and the more we can do that collectively as a community, then the better, and the better for the future of our industry by bringing that talent in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, your next gen group, I know, have been really active, haven't they, in terms of some of the events that they've been organising across the market. It's been really noticeable the amount of visibility and volume that they've brought to it.
Yeah, they're very energized. They have a wide, diverse program of events, and I think the recent one, I think it was only last week, or it might be coming up this week, is a masterclass around finance, which again is absolutely critical for sort of young sort of people coming into the industry in terms of how finance work in insurance. So these sort of areas, plus some sort of social things as well. These are fantastic, and again, that collaboration with BIBA, again, will allow sort of an elevation of some of those sort of type events, and attract even more of a wider audience, which is exactly what we need to try and achieve.
No, absolutely. And I have to say, I'm looking forward to getting involved in the legal and compliance masterclass, which is coming up in December. So that'll be great.
That's fantastic.
So, Mike, just moving on, I wanted to think a bit this morning about challenges and opportunities for MGAs, and particularly new businesses, and perhaps people who are sort of new to the market and thinking about opportunities to partner with capacity and to identify a product, and just thinking about some of the practical challenges that those people can face when they're coming to market. Thinking first about looking for a capacity partner. Any observations that you've got in relation to the state of that market right now, and some of the challenges that people will face when they are looking to start a new business?
Yeah, so there's, I suppose, the observations I would provide on that very, very valid sort of question, James, is that, so first and foremost, it basically distills down to the quality of your business plan. Okay, so if you're a startup MGA and you may not have any data, then effectively your business plan has to be compelling insofar that you are doing something in the main which is niche and specialist. It's something which can be attracted to a capacity partner for something they wouldn't necessarily have the expertise in, wouldn't necessarily want to invest in that expertise, but would be interested in deploying their capital to actually work with you on that side. So first and foremost, it's not about in your business plan, in terms of presenting to a capacity and saying, we're going to give you 5 million premium income in 3 years. That is not the way forward. That any premium income slide needs to, my recommendation, should be at the back of the presentation. What you need to do is have a storyboard and a narrative to potential capital. So like, this is where we've identified a gap in the market. This is where we have the underwriting expertise and knowledge to fill that gap. And then that would be CVs around your underwriting. Following on from that, how are you going to do your governance and oversight to ensure that the confidence of the capital provider is that the use of their capital from a regulatory perspective is tip top and best in class, and that would include things like management information, governance oversight, complaints data, distribution strategy from that bit. And then when you create that storyboard, then you get to in terms of what your anticipation is of what premium you're going to provide. And if you do that, then there is appetite out there for capital. And one of the other sort of tips I would say is that if you haven't got the data, and obviously, data now is a housekeeping, a hygiene element as opposed to, an arms race, then look at maybe some similar types of segments, sectors, which actually you can draw from and then try and use that data. Because insurers won't necessarily switch off that you haven't got the data because they recognize you're a startup. But what they want to see in the business plan is that you've looked and provided a wide sort of view in terms of how you can deliver an underwriting return on a consistent basis to that capital. And it would be remiss of me not to add that the association, the MGAA, does have an incubator membership tier. So we are happy to accept new MGAs in startup mode as a member, and we will help to work with them for introductions to our 60 plus capital providers, depending on what segment they do, to try and help them on that journey, in addition to supporting them on regulatory governance and oversight as well. So that's something, as you'd expect, us as at the centre of the MGA community, we can provide. Yeah. But that would be my key. It all distills down to the quality of your business plan and that proposition.
Yeah, understood. And in that sense, I guess no different from any business in any sector, really. And you preempted my next question, was going to be around the work that you do facilitating relationships between new MGAs and capacity providers. And I know you have a capacity exchange event as well, don't you? So
yeah, we had that last week or 2 weeks ago at in London, the banking hall. We had, I think, 35 plus insurers were exhibiting, and we had 270 delegates altogether. It was a very, very successful event, and it's part of our event calendar and something we do every year. So certainly September is the month of the year we host that. So something we're particularly proud of in terms of for all parties on that one.
Yeah, amazing. And just moving on from the question of capacity, but still thinking about new businesses, see a lot of new MGAs will be using technology at the heart of their business proposition and their operating model. But it strikes me there can be a cultural tension, perhaps, from a startup tech business that may be small, nimble, entrepreneurial, pragmatic, that is trying to partner with colossal financial institutions. Any observations that you've got around that potential clash of cultures and difficulty?
Yeah, I think there's two things I would sort of observe on that, and that's experience in terms of the last 4 years, and also when I was running MGAs, and I was involved in an MGA startup actually, so I understand some of the tensions on that. So the first thing I would say around sort of tech-based MGAs is that it's very important that they strike the balance between how much investment they're putting into the tech alongside what they're doing around distribution and actually the distribution of that product and the underwriting. Because we have seen examples where the balance in terms of investment into the tech is outweighed in terms of, how you're going to sell this product from that perspective. And you end up with a fantastic, shiny, great tech, which does everything, but you've got no way of selling it. So that is something which is the first thing I would sort of caution on. The second thing, in terms of that potential culture, I think insurers have moved on quite well in terms of that piece. Certainly a lot of the insurers who join us as members. And I think if you have that, excellent technology which provides and satisfies what the insurer requires, especially around management information, real-time underwriting, pricing optimization, real understanding, forensic understanding of the portfolio, then effectively what you'll find is that the MGA will probably have better and more nimble MI than that the insurer, who's probably got a stack of systems which they're obviously trying to reduce from 15 down to 1, which was certainly my experience when I was in the company market. So I think it's a case of, and it comes back to the business plan, James, what we talked about. If you can demonstrate that this is the level of data that we can provide to you, Mr. Insurer, we can do it through APIs. We don't have to have the old written or Excel bordereaux. Then insurers are going to gobble that up, frankly, and that culture won't go away, because I think, to be fair, and it's not a case to sort of beating up large insurers, but the fact is we all know they've all got ongoing projects around decommissioning legacy systems. So anything which actually complements what they're currently doing without adding to their challenges, then it will be a big tick in their box.
Yeah, no, understood. That's really, really insightful. Just moving on then to talk now about the regulatory landscape. And I scribbled in my notes the regulatory burden, but the FCA probably wouldn't want us to be referring to as a burden. So I'll stick with the regulatory landscape. The last couple of years, we've talked a lot in the insurance sector about consumer duty, about fair value assessments. And now that we are some way down the track in terms of the imposition of that regime, I just wondered what your reflections were as to how things are working, the challenges that your members are facing, and perhaps what the future may look like.
So if I take consumer duty first, I think our membership, and I think the whole market, welcomed consumer duty, because effectively, if you look at and you delve into consumer duty, you would hope it's actually what the market was already doing effectively. Nobody, I believe, in our market wakes up in the morning actually wanting to not satisfy customers. I'm a firm believer that everybody wants to get up and actually provide an excellent service from that perspective. So I think the consumer duty basically brought some sort of more forensic sort of view in terms of what that satisfaction looks like and how that satisfaction needs to be maintained consistently. And I think the market has accepted that. Yes, there's been some sort of bumps in terms of the implementation of that and the timing, which have been sort of well publicised. But I think it's going to be evolving, and I think the market will continue to work with Matt and the FCA in terms of how that consumer duty evolves. I think there's still some work to be done around sort of customer satisfaction around claims, and we as a trade association will on behalf of our members be at the heart of that. I think when you look at fair value, I think it's not unfair to say that the introduction of fair value probably could have been done slightly better. And I think the regulator has openly said that if they looked at it again, they may approach it in a different way, because effectively fair value, again, in terms of the premise, absolutely right, and I don't think the market has got any issues on that. But it did create a cottage industry in terms of the response back to the regulator around fair value, to the extent that whilst it was there in a way to stimulate innovation and new products, what was clear in terms of when we had round tables with the regulator, and certainly colleagues at BIBA are on that table as well, that some brokers effectively withdrew products, therefore reducing choice because of the burden, and we have to introduce that phrase, James, now, because of the burden of meeting the fair value requirements. And actually, so it didn't quite actually align with the objectives. And again, when we came to the end of fair value, and I know it's changed since that, but there wasn't one product had been actually withdrawn from the market. Now we've been through more recently the challenges around gap, and I think obviously the regulator quite rightly is looking at other product lines as well, using what I think is slightly blunt tool in terms of premium against claims. And again, we're talking to the regulator that there perhaps needs to be more science than just using premium against claims as a sort of yardstick of that there's no fair value. But again, that would be again, that's an area I think where was a challenge and will continue to be a challenge for our members and the market overall, whilst we continue to work with Matt and his team to find a smoother way through, but while still ensuring, and this is absolutely completely non-negotiable, that those products which are available to customers do offer the right fair value.
Understood. Thank you. That's really interesting. A final question from me, Mike, before I think we've got a couple of questions from people who are tuned in. It'd be remiss of me as a litigator and someone that spends a lot of my time working with MGAs around risk management and disputes between MGAs and capacity providers around binder breaches and those sorts of issues. Any observations or tips that you would give to MGAs to try and insulate themselves from those errors that can sometimes occur, and those disputes that can sometimes arise between a capacity provider and an MGA.
Okay, so again, drawing on my own experience when I was taking capital from when I was working running my own MGAs, the first thing is around investment into onboarding. So when you onboard with new capital, or add existing capital, the investment in time on onboarding is absolutely critical. So that absolutely every area of your operation is completely transparent, and that your capital understands your operation again, absolutely intimately, and you understand the expectations of your capital. The second bit, which I always deployed, and again, it's not, I'm sure it's quite common, is that I always had a legal contract in terms of my relationship with capital, and then I had a separate underwriting guide. Sometimes I've seen where those two have been slightly combined, which does actually produce ambiguity. So if I had a legal contract around my relationship with the capital, that would include obviously cancellation period, tenure. It would be called non-compete if we sort of left that capital from that perspective, and also show the expectations capital wanted from us on a legal perspective, as well as what we expected from them. And then when I moved into the underwriting guide, again, that was absolutely, whilst it was connected to the legal contract, the underwriting guide was so important insofar of recognizing exactly what capital required, that we also used a number of test cases to run through the underwriting guide to say, if this happened, would you be a breach of binder, or would it not be a breach of binder? And that also was very useful to do at the point of onboarding, because as you would know, James, in terms of your organisation, sometimes it's too late when the breach has happened if you haven't done the testing when you've onboarded with new capital. And in the main, finally, obviously, and with any new partnership, you're getting to know each other as around culture, behaviours, and whatever. So that sort of test type cases, certainly running it through an underwriting guide and say, where you get capital to say, well, actually, we wouldn't see that as a breach, but we would see X as a breach. That really informs both parties in terms of when they go into binding business, on a full-time basis. So that would be my observations and recommendations. That anything under that umbrella of onboarding, I think, is absolutely critical.
It's such good advice, and really kind of practical advice. So thanks very much for that, Mike. Those are all the questions that I've got, but I'm going to just introduce my colleague Harriet Strevens. Harriet, I think we've got a couple of questions from people who logged onto the webinar this morning.
Oh, we have indeed, and they are fairly lengthy, so I shall try to read them clearly, and so that you don't find yourself sitting there for very much longer. Mike, private equity still really like the sector from an M&A perspective, so there will still, I think, be an appetite to invest in the insurance sector, and MGAs, as they will see it as well, and as MGAs, as they will see that as a route to exit. Are you seeing an appetite for PE investors to invest in MGAs? And before you answer, what do you think are the key drivers that PEs are looking for when they are, for example, using AI tech to make them more attractive?
So my first observation on that question would be that there is, we have a number of our members who are actually PE backed, and they have excellent relationships. I think there is PE appetite for MGAs. I think when they look across where they want to invest their money, investing it in an underwriting vehicle where certainly the returns and EBITDA returns can be quite high. And if you look at some of the larger MGAs, certainly in the US, and I would quote someone like Brown and Brown in terms of their EBITDA return on MGAs, it's very, very impressive. You can see why PE would be attractive. The challenge, the challenge stroke opportunity around PE investment is around the underwriting performance and the underwriting result. And that actually is everything which actually the MGA really sits upon. So if it is delivering consistent underwriting returns and has a sort of flight path that, the market in terms of what it's in, has got sort of headroom, and they can continue to demonstrate that underwriting expertise, then without a doubt, PE will be attracted to that. One of the issues around, or challenges around M&A around MGAs, as opposed to the broker community, is actually getting right to the bottom of the underwriting performance, and that can sometimes go back many years in long tail business. And there's been a number of cases where there's been money owed by an MGA to capital through sort of a profit share arrangement or a loss corridor arrangement, as they're called, which hasn't been uncovered during due diligence through an M&A purchase. So that is one of the challenges from that perspective. I think, coming on to the second part of the question, I think what PE are looking for in MGA is, first and foremost, is it in a sector which is niche and specialism and has a real target market which has got growth and therefore sort of consistency? What is the fixed cost in terms of that MGA, and both in terms of its IT structure? So, has it got the necessary APIs? Has it got inbuilt the management information? Can it provide basically the engine which allows the underwriting teams to spend the majority of their time underwriting, as opposed to necessarily doing stuff on IT? And that is something you're seeing, coming back to James's question earlier, in certainly some of the newer type MGAs. You're seeing the IT they have in place is absolutely fantastic. And what it does do, again, using AI as well in some instances, is allow underwriters to underwrite. And that's what MGA's basically DNA is to underwrite. So a bit of a long answer, but PE appetite, but a number of sort of cautionary sort of levers around what they're looking for. But certainly opportunities are there.
I mean, you can see the attraction in terms of the return on investment quite straightforwardly, but I guess the due diligence really is the major point for them to concentrate on, isn't it?
Right.
My second question, that MGAs often operate as appointed representatives. In the FCA's feedback on the regime published on the 6th of September, it said that many principals were not carrying out AR annual reviews effectively. So, for example, the reviews are just being used as a tick box exercise and are not sufficiently in depth or data driven. What insight, if that's the right word, or comments have you got on any of this? I mean, how well do you think the regime is currently working?
I think the regime is improving. I think what the regulator did was the right thing in terms of basically, when it did its thematic review and reported back that that area needed, sharpening up, I suppose, with the best way I would say it. What I would say though is that, and I think the regulator would accept this, is that there was a flight to ARs, certainly for new startups, because from a cash liquidity perspective, people needed to start writing business quickly, if you're a startup. And that's a strain on liquidity. And that was against the backdrop of where authorizations within the regulator were something like 12, 15 months overdue. So you couldn't have a business. So I need to underwrite to actually start, generating revenue to pay salaries. And actually, I can't come to full authorization for 18 months. So there was a flight to ARs. Now, to be fair to the regulator, that turnaround has improved dramatically from that perspective. What we have within our membership, we have a number of specialist, what I call incubator firms, who act as principals. And part of their DNA actually is to ensure that, as a principal, that they provide the right support, governance and oversight. So I haven't seen that commentary around for my membership in terms of principals not meeting the regulatory sort of requirements. There was no doubt it did exist, because I think everyone on this webinar would have instances where they've seen that. But generally I think it is improving. There are clearly some networks who are focused solely on ARs, and obviously that's part of their business model, and they provide an excellent job and role in doing that from perspective. So I think the review was well intentioned. I think it was overdue, and I think moving on from that review, I think the AR sort of community is in a better place.
So uneducated, that's a pretty good outcome for the FCA, actually, at the end of the day, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay.
Well, those are the only questions that I've been asked to pass on to you by others. And unless you've got any, James, you want to continue to pin Michael down with so that he can't leave, I'll leave you to get on and do that. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks, Harriet. No, there are some other questions, but what I'm going to suggest is that we will ask Michael to answer those by email after the event, and we are hoping to publish a briefing note after this webinar. So any of the topics that we've not been able to cover, we'll be able to tie up when we push that out. We are slightly over time, and Mike's got a board meeting this morning, so we probably ought to let him go. Mike, thank you ever so much for your time this morning. That's been really interesting. We've covered a lot of ground. So thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks very much for the opportunity. Much enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed.
Fantastic. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. This webinar will be available on our YouTube channel and on our website once the editing process has been completed. But for now, thank you very much to everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much.